You're listening to Interzone Pod. My name is Gareth Jelley. I'm the editor of Interzone and Interzone Digital, and today I'm talking to Teika Marija Smits. Hello, Teika. Thank you very much for coming on the show today. Maybe just for Interzone listeners, you could kind of introduce yourself as a writer and tell people what they can find already and what they have to look forward to.
Thank you very much for having me on, Gareth. And my mind always goes blank at this moment. Who am I? Where am I? My name is Teika Marija Smits, and I'm a freelance editor and writer and ex-publisher as well. I used to run my own small press, but now I mainly focus on doing freelance editing jobs and writing as much as possible. But that's always tricky when you've got so many things to do, kids to keep busy in the summer holidays, etc., which I'm sure you probably know about.
Right.
Writing wise, I've got my debut short story collection coming up. It's going to be published on 23rd of August, and that's called Umbilical, and it's coming out with UMBILICAL Press. And I have another short story collection, just a small one, coming out hopefully by the end of the year, which I don't think I can say much more about. And so that I'm excited about that. And I've got various novels in various states of progress, I think, like many writers. And very, very pleased to recently have a story called The November Room, or Leaving the Labyrinth, out on IZ Digital, which was great.
That's actually a good place to start, sort of like that particular story. Could you sort of tell people who maybe haven't found it yet a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I've got a very clear memory of reading Susanna Clarke's Piranesi, and I think like lots of people, I sort of fell in love with that book and just got a real sense of the milieu as a very magical place with all these marble statues and these marble steps. And it was a wonderful place, a sort of liminal place almost between worlds. And I really wanted to recreate that sort of feeling of magic or otherness. And I somehow wanted marble to be in there, but I am quite a logical thinker. So to me, I had to have marble there for a reason. So I made my protagonist a sculptor. And so she sculpts with marble. And that kind of gave me a sense of what my protagonist did. But then I had that whole kind of idea that I thought would be lovely to write a story that's set in this world. But then one day I was going into my son's bedroom, and he has this calendar up on this wall, and it's got cats on it because we're all big fans of cats. But he hadn't changed it to the next month, and I think it was like stuck on a particular month. I can't remember which one it was, whether it was June or July or something. But I was like, look, whenever I come in here, it's June. When it's not June, it's like August or whatever. And he's like, oh, yeah, I'm going to change it in a minute. I'm going to do it in a bit. But he's always like too busy. And I sort of just literally stepped away from his bedroom, and I was like, oh, that's kind of quite an interesting idea. What happens if you were to go into a room and it was always that month? And I kind of thought, I just really like that idea. And then I sort of matched it together with the marble landscape. It's a marble labyrinth. And then I knew that my protagonist would be a mother, and she would have to basically go very deep into her psyche to move around this labyrinth and maybe get stuck in rooms. And there's one room she particularly doesn't want to go into, and that's the November room. And you find out in the story why she doesn't want to go into the November room. So I think that's probably how lots of writers kind of come up with their ideas. Definitely about mashing two different things together. And it's at some point it's like a light bulb goes on and you suddenly realize how this story is going to work. But I think if you just start off with a milieu, if you were just to say, well, there's the story is a marble labyrinth, you might not quite know where to go from there. But because I then had this sort of idea of the November room, or always being stuck in a room, I think that's really what propelled the story forward and helped me in my mind to figure out what it was going to be about, actually. So yeah, that's the November room, or Leaving the Labyrinth, and yeah, we've both received some nice comments about it, haven't we?
It's definitely worth checking out for sure.
Yeah, well, I've had some. I don't know whether I've mentioned, but I've had some really nice messages from people who've said, "Oh, I've just totally it's made me think about moments when I've been parenting." And yeah, we've had some quite interesting conversations, and I think I'd like to think that's what a good story can do. Just expand your, I suppose, just kind of deepen your thinking and maybe make you think in different ways and reassess things that you've done, maybe. So those are why I like those stories so much. I mean, as you know, Gareth, we've been doing the IZ story socials, and the stories that really make me think, have certain ideas in them, or explore the human psyche, those are the stories that I get particularly excited about, and obviously they're the kind of stories that I like to write as well. So so anything that's kind of about the human psyche, that I'm interested.
And thinking back to when when you were starting out as a writer, when you first sort of started writing short stories, who were the writers you kind of felt influenced by, or that maybe you kind of consciously went to, not to emulate, but to sort of, to learn lessons from?
I guess that's a very good question, and again, one that I'm probably absolutely going to go blank at the moment. But I am a big fan of fairy tales. My name, Teika, is a Latvian name. It actually does mean fairy tale, and Smits is basically the Latvian form of smith. And obviously, as we know, a smith is somebody who works with something. So technically, I'm a fairy tale smith, and I quite like the sound of that, really, because I do like to work with fairy tales. And I know lots of people might think, oh, well, fairy tales are rather old-fashioned, or they're twee, but there's various books that I've read that really analyse them in deep, and one of them is called Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, and it's an amazing book which takes these ancient tales, folklore and fairy tales, and she looks at them through a very kind of Jungian perspective. And she talks about archetypal plots, she talks about archetypal characters, and how, even though on the surface the fairy tales might just seem like kind of morality tales, or just very straightforward tales of, princes and princesses, actually they tell us a lot about the human psyche and about the universal human experience. So they're actually a lot deeper than we might give them credit for. But again, it does show that the fact that these stories have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they persist to this day, means, I do feel that it means that they do speak to us as humans, and so they must have some sort of archetypal knowledge, or give us, like we discussed the other day, they give us like a blueprint for life and how we should act in certain situations. For instance, a story that I'm always drawn to is Bluebeard, and it's about a naive young woman who has a sense that this man is a predator, and she's absolutely right, but she everyone's saying no, but he's rich and he's handsome and he'll make a very good husband for you, and there's something inside her saying, I'm not so sure about this. And what Clarissa Pinkola Estes says is that we really must listen to our intuitive voices when we are in certain situations or around certain people, and listen to them. But the idea is that society or the mother says, oh, no, he's lovely and he's very rich and he's very powerful. And again, sort of the mother is like, she's supposed to be sort of a metaphor or show how society can often suppress women's fears about certain situations and say, no, everything's nice, just be nice to everybody, just, smile and say everything's, be very agreeable. So I do think that these fairy tales actually are quite deep in their wisdom, but if you were to solely read them on a sort of very superficial basis, they do seem quite black and white. But I do think they have a lot to say to us still. So those were probably the kind of first short stories that impressed on me. And then I wrote in a recent blog post about probably one collection that I read a long time ago was Will Self's Grey Area. That was probably the first collection of short stories that really resonated with me, because it opened my eyes to the possibility of just how you can sort of stretch a story and how it could be in different genres like science fiction or fantasy or literary or slightly like horrifying or supernatural. And he packs a lot of story into each story. And I think I was very impressed by what he managed to do with each story in that collection. And even though I wasn't immediately, I was a reader then in my 20s, and it's not like I went and ran out and started writing short stories, but it did impress on me just how powerful a good short story could be. And I suppose I've always just been trying to recreate that sense of just how powerful a story can be, a short story.
You linked sort of fairy tales, and you kind of took fairy tales and science fiction for the issue of Shoreline of Infinity that you edited. Maybe that this is a good point to kind of talk a bit about sort of the background behind that, and also, just those connections for you between fairy tales and science fiction.
Yeah, that was really good fun to edit that magazine. And at first I thought, oh, this is really quite niche, mashing together fairy tales and science fiction. But we got the largest response to the call for submissions I think Shoreline had up to that point. And so it seemed to really resonate with other people. So I think it seems like one that shouldn't really work, but in many ways it does work, because what people did was they either gave already a well-known fairy tale a science fictional twist, so they set it somewhere on a completely different planet or solar system or wherever, or they sometimes tried making up their own fairy tales, which I have to add is a very difficult thing to do. And occasionally it was kind of a mashup of everything. It was kind of maybe a newer fairy tale, but elements of older fairy tales. We might recognisably see elements, and then adding in some sort of science fiction tropes as well. So I was really, really pleased with the submissions that we got. And I was only able to accept a very small amount for my issue. I think only something like 7 out of the 300, which was really hard for me to have to make those decisions. It was really tough. But at the end of the day, I went with the stories that really connected with me and that I thought would work together as a whole in an anthology, because I think that's the thing you've always got to have in mind as an editor. How does this work in the whole of the anthology or the magazine? How does each piece speak to another piece?
And you're editing another anthology for Luna Press Publishing, right?
Yes.
Which is about another story that I think kind of speaks to you. I think maybe that's something which it's a great chance to talk about the anthology, but also about that particular story maybe.
Yes, well, We had very kind of checkered, very interesting publication history, because it was published in 1924 in the US in the English language, and yet it was by a Russian author writing it in Russian. And why wasn't it published in Russia? So, it's because of the political situation there. I think it really, the authorities wanted to suppress it, and yet it found a way out, because in essence, the novel is about it kind of like, well, it's about a totalitarian state. And the Russians didn't really want this discussed or read about at the time. So it ended up being published in the US. So it's one of those books that has inspired so many other writers. I mean, George Orwell said it was a direct inspiration for 1984, but other writers have said that they were inspired by George Orwell's 1984, or they were inspired by Yevgeny Zamyatin's We. So I think it's fascinating the way that it's one of those stories that resonates with people, because it does speak to our fears about what happened in the Soviet Union under people like Stalin, and how absolutely horrific that was. And I mean, in essence, 1984 kind of repurposed or recycled Yevgeny Zamyatin's We, and that obviously resonated with the Western audience as well, and it's made its way into popular now. The whole dystopian fiction, it's totally now popular culture, and there's so many films and stories and novels about it. So I really felt that as it was coming up to 2024, which is just like unbelievable, so it's the 100-year anniversary, I still thought this is relevant today. And obviously, particularly with the war in Ukraine, it is very relevant today. And I feel that Zamyatin is saying we have to stand up to those in power who are going to speak for all Russians, because they're not speaking for all Russians. So I think I still think it's a very powerful book. And I felt that there was probably enough interest in it where there would be short story writers might be inspired to write a short story, kind of not particularly set in the world. They can set it in whatever world they want, but there's to be some direct link between We and their short story, that we could still go, that it references that, or it's to do with that character, or some idea in it. And I kind of thought, well, I think that it's probably quite niche. There's probably going to be a few people interested in it, but we have had so much support for it. People have been messaging me left, right, and centre going, I love this idea. I want to write something. So I've been really pleased with it. And we are going to be giving the royalties to a charity to help. That I think it's Ukrainian humanitarian relief aid. Sorry, my brain's not working so well. But yes, basically, the royalties are going to help those who've been affected by the war in Ukraine. So it's really been interesting to see how people have responded to the war in Ukraine, and how people have responded to Russian creatives as well, and Ukrainian creatives, because I've sometimes found this kind of conversation where we were actually talking about this at Edge Lit the other day, saying about how I was speaking with a well-known writer, and they were talking about how they were completely confused by how some people, wanted to, not have Tchaikovsky, or not, to sort of ban books by Russians written hundreds of years ago. And this author was, really saying, I just don't get it. And I'm sort of very interested in this idea. This leads on to a huge topic, but it's interesting because so many of the well-known books by Russians are talking about the human state and the human condition, and how basically about how the Soviet Union wasn't good for people. And so I think those books should be in circulation. I think we need to read about what the ordinary Russian felt in those times, so we can empathize with them. So yeah, that's kind of my take on it, that I think it's always valuable to read from these people who've lived through those experiences. I'm half Russian myself, but I'm also half Latvian. And so if you know anything, well, that's the thing, most people don't know much about Latvia, but poor Latvia basically was stuck between the Soviets and the Nazis in World War II, and they had a horrible time of it. And so I have always been interested in kind of that grey area of a, kind of like person who's absolutely torn between two regimes that are really not working, well, that are, and to see how real people had to cope in those situations, absolutely fascinating. And definitely I would point people to, again, just finding out more about history, about how these countries are all interlinked, and what the people actually had to cope with at that time. And they had huge amounts of horrible stuff to deal with, basically.
Yeah. And so the call for We is open now, or opening in the after the summer? When do people do that?
Yeah, it's actually going to be, we've got a weekend when we're opening it up in October. So I would, again, it's gone from my memory, but one of the early weekends in October. So if you go and check out the Lunar Press Publishing website, if you go to submissions, you will see all the details about it. So that's kind of what Lunar Press Publishing does. They have a very small submission window, and it's so we thought, we'd go with a small submission window, but hope that everyone's ready for it when it comes round. And we gave people lots and lots of notice, so that they had like around 4 months so that they could read the book or reacquaint themselves with the book, generate ideas, and then hopefully write a really, really good short story.
Sounds wonderful. Moving back to your work, you have this collection coming out from Newcon Press, Umbilical. What kind of time period does that represent of your work? What's the sort of oldest story you can, or when did the oldest story start? And sort of it runs up, I guess, to the last couple of years, right?
Yes, definitely. Well, I think my first published short story was about 12 years ago. But I don't think it's, I would probably say it's mostly work from the past 7 or 8 years, with some brand new ones that I've written. So I think there's about 4 brand new ones in there, but the rest of the work has been published in anthologies or magazines, and it probably represents about a decade's worth of work. Not all the short stories, but obviously the ones that I felt tied in with the theme of umbilical. So it's really a lot of it is about motherhood, but it's in the wider scope. It's kind of about the bonds that connect us to one another.
Yeah, I was going to say that title, Umbilical, you can read it in so many ways, right? Where did because there's a story in there called Umbilical, which was in Parsec. Did you always know that would be the title for the collection, or did that sort of emerge as you were putting the collection together?
It was, Umbilical is, again, it's actually a short story. So it's actually only a couple of thousand words long. And I kind of knew that it connected with people because, well, for a start, I was crying when it's another one of those, Gareth, where I ended up crying more than the reader, but I felt very emotional when I was writing it. And then when my crit group read it, and quite a few grown men in the crit group said that they found it quite emotional, and I thought, okay, I think it's working then. So I felt that it was connecting with people, so it made sense then for it to be kind of the cornerstone of the collection. But yeah, you'd have to read the story. But it's in Parsec issue 4 if anyone is a subscriber.
Does it open the collection, or is it sort of midway through? Where did you place it sequence-wise?
Yeah, it's midway through, about a third of the way through, I think. Yeah, so I spent a lot of time on arranging the collection. It's a really interesting process because I've edited a number of short story collections for like single author collections in my freelance editing work. And I've put together a lot of anthologies as well. So I've done a lot of this for other people, basically. And so I didn't feel it was too hard to do it. But basically, once I spoke to my editor, Ian Waits, about is it okay to mash together SF and fantasy and horror? And he was like, yes, absolutely. So when I knew that he was on board with me doing that, I just kind of went for it and kind of thought, yeah, let's make it all, I'll put a sci-fi next to a fantasy, but then I have a horror next. And I sort of try to sort of make it as different for the reader, so they'd get a kind of quite different reading experience, sort of going from one story to the next, literally sort of with, I was working out, or this story is written from like first person point of view, but it's also quite short. And this one has a male protagonist and this has a female protagonist or something. So I try to make it as different as possible, even sort of looking at the endings. This is quite an upbeat ending and this is quite a sad ending. So I was trying to make it quite mixed for the reader, so be a nice variety for them. But I literally only finished proofreading it a couple of weeks ago. And I think, as most writers say, when you get to the end of that point where you've kind of proofread it and you've edited it and then proofread it so many times, you almost can't see the wood for the trees, because you're like, did I write this? Will anyone write this? I don't know. I've read it so many times. I'm not even sure. You sort of, but it's very much a thing that writers get when you are so well acquainted with your own work. You just don't have that objectivity anymore. So I'm going to have to step back from it for a while, until sort of publication date on the 23rd of August, when I might start to look, just, flick through it and go, oh yeah, I like that one.
So something you said to me in an email, I think, was along the lines of the real satisfaction was in completing it, in writing it, and getting the positive reviews is really gratifying, but that you have that process of sort of writing it and feeling that you've completed it with these stories, and also with your interest in kind of like psychology. Did you find yourself sort of understanding yourself better through the stories?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Every single story I write is for me, to help me to better understand myself. So really, the whole, in many ways you could say short story writing is incredibly, egotistical, or, it's about the fact that I'm thinking, well, hey, this story is really all about me, but I'm sure somebody will want to read it, so I'm going to put it out there, But I mean, really, it's that quandary of writers, isn't it? They're like, yes, we are going to write, and a lot of it, we might pour quite a lot of ourselves into it, but then there's that point where you have to let it go, and you do have to be confident enough or egotistical enough to go, yeah, I think this deserves to be in the world. I think people will connect with it. But I think with a lot of these stories, that's what I mean about, for me, the actual creation of the story is the most important bit. Because when I write a short story, I do learn so much more about myself, because I want to put the protagonist in so many different situations, because I want to test myself. What would I do? And I want to put them into the most kind of scary or most heartbreaking situations. And I want to work through whether I would go through that in a particular way and how I would react. So, and the actual process of creation for me is incredibly, I find it not only incredibly relaxing, but I find it like really healing as well. So yeah, for me, the actual act of creation is the real gift. And of course, funnily enough, one of the protagonists in one of the stories is an artist. And she actually goes through her creative process, and she talks about how fulfilling it is to her.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. But I'm also wondering, because you're writing and you're also editing and you're also publishing. So there's like a triple focus, right? You're thinking as an editor. You're also thinking as a publisher, which is a different set of decisions again. Do you fence all that off very well when you're writing, or do you find your kind of your editor self sort of popping its head up and while you're actually in that creative process, or do you have it nicely fenced off?
Yeah, I tend to have it nicely fenced off, because I think the first draft, I think my first drafts tend to be quite clean, actually. I don't go and tinker with them, but that's because when I do a first draft, and this is something that I learned from Alison Moore, and it made me absolutely relieved when I heard, because I'm a really big fan of Alison Moore's writing and her short stories, so do go and check them out if some people haven't heard of Alison Moore. But I remember her saying that she felt that she couldn't really progress and write extra that day until she'd gone back and just sort of read it and then maybe edited the paragraph or two before, and felt she was happy with that. And I do that as well. So I don't tend to just start off a brand new paragraph. I'm like, let me just read the page that I wrote yesterday, and it helps me get back in the zone. And I can tinker with a few things here and there, but generally, it helps me to progress to the new paragraph, and it does help me to tidy up as I go, so that when I get to the end of a short story, it hopefully is more, again, a case of the last edit will be more of a tidy than a complete, oh my gosh, this absolutely needs to be chopped apart.
Right.
So that's kind of how I work. But I'm very much kind of thinking that first draft is such a pleasurable experience. It's just about, this is me and my story. An editor hasn't rejected it yet or accepted it or whatever, but it's just me and the story, and I get to live in this world for a bit before anyone else gets to live in that world, and it's just the most amazing feeling, I think. So yeah, I always think of the creative act as an incredibly invigorating, but also inspiring and like I said, healing, because our lives are just so stressful at the moment. And I think writing is something that you can do and step away from social media, step away from all the demands on us, and you get to escape into this wonderful world of your own making, and it's just the best, basically.
You're also a poet. Were you writing poems before you were writing short stories, or the other way around?
Kind of all at the same time. But the good thing about poetry is it's, a good poem can still take a while to write, but because poems are, just by their very format, they are short, you can write them a lot faster than a 6,000 word short story, or a 12,000 word novella, or a novel that has to be 100,000 words or something. So it's much, I think I started more with poems just because it felt like a lower hurdle. Like I felt like you don't have this huge investment. You kind of think, well, I can spend a week or two writing a poem, and if no one likes it, that's fine. But I think if I had sort of poured in as much love and time into short stories and then got nowhere with them, which would have been understandable because I wouldn't have been very good to begin with, then I think that might have been quite disappointing. So I think kind of poems help me to get used to rejections, basically, in a sort of more kind of way that I didn't give up on writing. So yeah, so I could I could carry on writing because I could always spend another day or two or a week writing more poems and feel that I was making progress. But with short stories, you still have to invest quite a lot of time. And certainly with a novel, I mean, months, if not years. So.
Well, that's a good link, because you're also, you mentioned at the beginning novels. Was that a natural kind of progression for you to go from short stories to novels? Was that part of the plan, basically?
Yes, I just like writing in so many different forms because they all feed into one another, and they both you get to, like, even if you write poetry. With poetry, you have to become so succinct. You have to be so careful about your word choice because every single word matters in a poem. Because if it's only 8 or 10 lines, it absolutely has to be there for a reason. And so writing a poem gives a novelist a very good sense of what words need to be there, because you could go on for great pages of description, and yet again, what you would look at that and go, well, actually, does it all need to be there? And it makes you look at the sentences on a sort of on a micro level. Again, just even cutting a sentence. Well, do we need that adjective, and do we need that adverb? And I think writing poetry and writing novels can help to inform one another. And the same with short stories. The short stories, you get immediately a sense of the pacing, and that helps to inform you. You get like when you're writing a novel, you can go, well, hang on, I can slow down now because I've got more words. But with a short story, you have to realize, oh, I have to speed up now because I've only got 2,000 or 3,000 words to play with. So,
right.
Yeah, they all really help one another. So I would recommend that to any writer to sometimes just have fun writing in different forms, because you'll learn a lot from it.
Mm-hmm. And can you tease any of the novels, or are they still in the kind of the early stages?
Well, my novel at the moment, I can't really talk much about, but it is called Bluebeard's Theatre. So that might give you a sense of what it might be about. But it's basically The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter mashed together with The Prestige by Christopher Priest.
Oh, that's an interesting comp.
Yeah, so I'm just hoping someone will like that, basically.
You mentioned Piranesi earlier, and I was wondering what other sort of authors and books have really kind of got stuck in your head recently, in addition to that one.
Well, I would say her earlier novel, which I'm probably going to get this wrong now, but is it Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, or is it Mr. Norrell and Jonathan Strange? My mind is just gone.
There is a universe where it's the one way around, and there is a universe where it's the other way around. So I think we can deal with it.
That's an amazing book, which is, I don't know whether you'd call it historical fantasy, but it's historical fiction, but it's also fantastical. It's got magic in there. It's got these dark fairies. I mean, it's amazing. It's just totally my kind of book. And I just think lots of people love that concept so much, and they love the world. And I do write historical fiction as well, which I don't know why I kind of berate myself for doing it, because historical fiction is I do think it's one of the hardest genres to write, because the huge amount of research that is necessary. It can be overwhelming. There's so much you have to do if you want to get stuff right. And yet I'm absolutely drawn to it because I find it so enlightening to learn about history, and to learn about how people lived in the past, and how, again, psychologically, they really weren't very different from us. They still had those same needs as we have today, and the same kind of relationships, and the same struggles, internal struggles and external struggles. So I find it absolutely fascinating to do historical research, but there's a lot to be done when you're writing a historical fiction. And then what I like to do, again, is weave in either science fiction, so some sort of technological development, or fantasy. And then you have to sort of do a whole lot of world building for that as well. So it's really hard, but I love it. I absolutely love it. So yeah, so Susanna Clarke, she's just like the best, basically.
Okay, that's a good recommendation.
Mm.
Well, thank you very much for talking to me. Good luck with Umbilical, and do check out the November Room, which is on interzone.digital. And if you haven't subscribed to Interzone, the print magazine, go to interzone.press. Every subscription helps.
Definitely. Well, thank you very much, Gareth.
You've been listening to Interzone Pod with me, Gareth Jelley, the editor of Interzone and Interzone Digital, and my guest, Teika Marija Smits. Thank you for listening. See you next time.